So Barbara, with that, I'd love to welcome you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's wonderful to be with you.
So why don't we dive right into a few questions that I'd like to pose, starting with the fact that you started your role just a few days into this pandemic from the other side of the country. So, onboarding can really be difficult in the best of times. I'm sure our viewers would love to hear what it was like to join and lead an organization when the world was shut down. How did you tackle that?
With kind of, so the quick and honest answer is we made it up as we went along. That's the honest truth. But I mean, just to give a little bit of context, I had, as you know, I had accepted the role in December of 2019 with a plan to start on April the 1st of 2020. And 2019 was a very, very different year than 2020 ended up looking like. And so I had thought, my permanent home is in Vancouver. I got myself an apartment in Ottawa. I was going to be spending the vast majority of my time in Ottawa and traveling, frankly, as part of this job. Yeah. And I had this image in my head that I would kind of bound into the office on the 1st of April, and I'd maybe have a new outfit on, and I would meet the team, and I'm a very extroverted person, and so I thought, gosh, there's just going to be this amazing energy that I gain from working with this amazing team, and we'll all learn from each other as we embark upon setting a new course for the organization. Well, almost none of that happened. I was in Vancouver like this, right at my computer on that day, that 1st of April. And we embarked upon an exercise. I mean, I think if you think back to that time, we all thought this was just going to be very short term, right? So we didn't imagine that a year later, we would still be in this, from a work perspective, kind of in this same virtual reality of working together. We thought we were closing the office, and we thought, it'll be for a few weeks. By May or June, we'll be back in the office. Everything will kind of be back in sync. But I knew a few things. I knew that I had to give the team an opportunity to get to know me as the new leader and the board. I knew I'd never met most of the people in person. I knew that I also needed to get to know them. And those were the two core fundamentals that we really had to focus on in those first few weeks. And so it was a whole series of virtual town halls, one-on-ones, small groups, of opportunities for me to learn, to listen, to ask questions, to gain insight into the culture of the organization, into the situation, kind of the current state of the organization. I did that with as many of the staff as I could, and with every single board member in those first probably 4 weeks. It was a really deep dive, and I found it challenging, to be honest with you, because I am an extroverted person. I get my energy from being able to lever off of the energy of other people around me. And so to be literally in this flat reality was a bit disorienting. Some days it still is. Some days it still is. But as I said, it really reinforced for me the importance of giving them opportunities to get to know me and me them, and just finding as many opportunities as possible for me to be curious, to listen and learn and come to understand the organization. I also really had to create ways that were of just giving them opportunities to get to know me as a person. I use humor a lot in my day-to-day interactions. So I found myself taping videos that I never hoped to see the light of day in any kind of a public context, but they were just, and some that were more, frankly, evocative of where we were at this moment in time. And it progressed from that first, I would say, 90 days. It became clear by summer that this was a different reality, that we were looking from a long-term perspective at something very different. And so we pivoted after that. We had to, and that really was a bit of a kind of a shift point for us from a leadership level at the board and at the staff level as well. But that was what the first horizon of time looked like.
I mean, that it sounds like that happened in a very short period of time, over maybe three months or so. So I'm curious a little bit, Barbara, in terms of any of innovations, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but I'm just curious, as you were adapting yourself over those
Yeah.
first 3 months. What did you find was most effective? So what I'm thinking is this: our viewers who are going to be either shortly transitioning or who have recently transitioned are asking themselves this very question, right? So how am I going to really get my finger on the pulse of the culture of this organization, and give staff an opportunity to get to know who I am as a human being, right? Not just as a CEO.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are really, really good questions. As I said, in those first 90 days, my real priority was to get to know the team, to get to know the board, to come to understand the culture of the organization, and to come to, as quickly as possible, understand kind of the current state. Because we had this pandemic unfolding as well. So even just from a programmatic perspective, we're a humanitarian organization. We had operations around the world that had to quickly reorient their programs. We needed changes in arrangements made to our funding. All of those kinds of things were all happening literally on a day by day, hour by hour, week by week basis. But in the bigger sense, it also it was pretty clear within that first 3 months, I would say, that this pandemic, ironically, was giving us a huge opportunity. In the sense that the world, the ecosystem of international NGOs, and the broad mandate that we have for the betterment of all people, it's been going through a change. The conversation at a meta level globally has really been going through a very significant change over the last 5 to 10 years. And it became quite clear in the early days that this pandemic actually was disproportionately impacting some of the populations and the groups of people in the world who are already vulnerable and suffer from injustice. And women and girls and non-binary people would be predominant in that disproportionate negative impact. And it was giving Care Canada an opportunity to come out of this pandemic with a very, very clear sense of purpose and mission. We were an organization, very strong, very sound, but with a very, very wide mandate. And it was very clear that in order to be successful going forward, the organization needed to sharpen the business model and the value proposition. And much as it sounds harsh to say, the pandemic has actually given us a very key opportunity to do exactly that, because the pandemic has had such a disproportionate impact on the population whose mission, our mission is the betterment of women and girls. And this pandemic has given us that renewed call to action and a very clear, sharp sense of purpose and focus of what our job is coming out of this pandemic and the recovery out of this pandemic. Our call to action is now very clear. We got to that very quickly in my first 6 to 7 months. I'm not sure if the pandemic hadn't happened, ironically, I don't think we would have been able to get to as quick and purposeful and sharp that sense of focus if it had been normal times.
Right.
So we've used that moment to innovate and to really clarify the purpose that we want to have and the way in which we're going to go about achieving that purpose.
So your comments really segue into the next question. So I think with renewal and change, renewed purpose, there's a sense of excitement from across the organization, but probably a sense of anxiety and fear. So I guess my question is really around how has the pandemic affected the broader team vis-a-vis the change you've undergone and are undergoing, and how has it impacted the way you're working as an organization?
From a culture perspective and from a team perspective, there's probably been 3 phases, if I can put it that way. The first phase was what I talked about earlier, where this is going to be for a couple months. We'll be back in the office by June. Everything's going to be fine. And then there was this understanding by June that was not going to happen and that this was going to be something that was more, I think then we would have said, January. So like a 6-month sort of a proposition. And by the fall, late fall, it was very, very clear that we were going to be moving into a third phase, and that this was a very different moment of evolution and growth and change for the organization. And I think it began to become very clear from an organizational perspective that we would never go back to being what we were.
Yeah.
In terms of how we function day to day, in terms of how we construct teams, in terms of how we work together. And so the opportunity for us has been to really think both consciously and subconsciously, individually, in small groups, at the leadership level of the organization, at the board table. What are the fundamentals of the culture of this organization that we have to sustain and keep and hold close to our hearts because they are inherent to our values and our mission and purpose? And how do we adapt in terms of how we work together to hold true to that, but acknowledge that we will never have an office culture that is focused on a building in Ottawa the way we used to have. We have staff now literally coast to coast across the country. We, in fact, have staff overseas who work for Care Canada, but they're living overseas. So we have to cope and manage and figure out time zones and modalities of communication. And there's certain things that are better written. There's certain things that are better in an email or Teams. There's certain things that we take to a town hall. There's certain things that I'll bring up in my weekly open office hours. That's just a drop-in, no agenda opportunity to sit down and have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
So we're figuring out, because now we're understanding that this is the way forward for us as an organization. And so we're creating different ways of working together, but always making sure that we're doing it in a way that's inclusive, that's very much in accordance with our, as I said, our beliefs and our values and our sense of purpose as an organization. But it's changing, and we're all learning and correcting. When we make mistakes, which we do, we correct them as we go.
So I guess my question is, from a leadership and culture perspective, what has emerged? And I think you may have alluded to a few things, but what has emerged during COVID that you would want to hang on to organizationally in a post-pandemic world? And maybe there's a separate question in there that's not organizationally, but as a CEO, are there certain things that you would like to hang on to post-pandemic?
Yeah. Well, probably the thing I want to hold on to post-pandemic, or the thing that I maybe hope for, is a better way to put it, is I sure can't wait till we can all be meeting each other in person again. Because I've really come to understand as a person, as a leader, the importance, just that visceral importance of human connection. We've learned, our brains have adapted. We've all figured this out, but it will be better. It's an imperfect mode that we all find ourselves operating in, but it will be different, as you said. So from an innovation, pandemic-inspired innovation perspective, I think I'd probably come at that from three strands. The first is just in our programmatic work. We're doing much of our work now very differently. We used to say, oh my gosh, we have to do a training session with our team at our project in Zimbabwe, and 3 of our staff would get on a plane and head off to Zimbabwe for a week for a 2-day training session. That costs a lot of money. That burns a lot of carbon fuel. It burns a lot of carbon fuel. That raises a sustainability question. And it also, I think, sends a message that we know best, that the people in the global north know better, or let's say better than those in the global south. And so I think from a program perspective, but also from a values perspective, this pandemic has been a game changer for the work that we do. Not the humanitarian work, that has to be on the ground. Literally situations like Yemen and Syria, that's very difficult, in some cases impossible to do remotely. You have to be there to set up sanitation and public hygiene programs as a couple of examples. But the longer term development work, it's going to change, because we will say that money's better left in Zimbabwe, partnering with a local organization, hiring local women leaders to do the work. And we can do most of this training virtually. Doesn't burn as much fuel, doesn't do as much damage to the environment. It gives us the flexibility to put more money into the local women's rights organizations and the local partners that we work with. And it also, I think, the term is decolonizes the work. It begins to send that important message that we are equal partners in this venture of human betterment. At the board level, lots and lots of practical innovations. I think we will go into a more permanent modality of the board, maybe meeting a couple of times a year in person and a couple of times a year virtually. We've learned all kinds of new skills. The board has learned about decision-making in a virtual environment. As management, we've learned a lot about how to better bring decisions to the board table in a virtual environment that uses the board's time and talent and their thought leadership more efficiently, and frankly has management working in a more effective and efficient way as well. And then the third is really the team and that that notion of culture. What is it about how we work together? And that is, I would call that a work in progress. Yeah. We still, I think there is a Zoom fatigue for all of us. So we don't actually do as many all staff things on Zoom, frankly, as we did probably 6 months ago. We do them in smaller groups. We try to do things that are more spontaneous. We try to do things where there's many voices in the conversation and it's not talking at. Right. So we've learned a lot of techniques along the way that have brought us, I think, as I said, back to that place of we're a very, very values-driven organization, as many are. We live those values and we aspire to live those values in how we work together every day. And this has really, I think, called on all of us to figure out how we bring our best selves and our best sense of purpose to the work in a different kind of way than kind of jumping up from your desk and walking over to somebody else's and grabbing them and tapping them on the shoulder and saying, "Can I talk to you about this for a minute?" And we've just had to figure out different ways in quite literal terms of how we do that. But I've seen remarkable adaptability and gifts that people have brought to bear that I don't think a lot of us even knew that we had, John. Yeah. That to me has been one of the gifts of this time.
That's excellent, Barbara. Maybe one more question.
Sure.
For you. So this is for all the viewers who are about to start in a new role, be it a C-suite or VP level even role. What words of advice or support or wisdom would you offer them as they're about to, embark on this new journey themselves?
In this virtual environment,
yes.
Give the people around you as many different opportunities to get to know you and your voice. I mean that quite literally. Your voice and how you want to be a leader in that organization. Give them as many opportunities to get to know you as you can possibly offer up to them in as many different ways as you can do that. And listen, just listen in those first few weeks. Do a lot of listening. People are tired. It's been a hard year for many, many people, personally, professionally, and being empathic, using your listening ears, as they say in preschool, as much as possible. I think can only serve one well, starting on a new adventure.
Thank you for joining me here. I'm glad to hear and to know that your work is going well at CARE. Like I said earlier, they're very lucky to have you. And for those of you who have tuned in to watch today, thank you as well. And if you're interested in participating in this very series or just talking about leadership with Boyden, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. Thank you again, Barbara.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.